Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining in. Welcome to India Factoring Chat Show, Factoring One Stop Solution for your global aspirations. I'm Vinod Vasan, your host for the day. Today, we have an eminent speaker to join with us. Before we get into the show, let me take you through India Factoring first. India Factoring offers working capital solutions through the factoring products aimed at converting your receivables into cash. The company is a subsidiary of a European bank, Fimbank PLC Malta, and is registered with the RBI as an NBFC factor. India Factoring is also AD3 category authorized dealer. Through our global network, we offer one-stop solutions around receivable finance. So today, our speaker will talk to us about fraud prevention in global trade and finance, relevance of technology in fraud prevention, factoring, trade finance, and the global markets, and solve all your queries pertains to fraud prevention. Please stay tuned. Let us welcome our speaker, Neil Schranhard, Chief Executive Officer at Monetago. Neil is a seasoned capital markets executive with a proven leadership experience gained over 2 decades with the major financial services providers in London, Tokyo, and Hong Kong. Based now in Singapore, he has led Monetago's expansion into Asia markets and now executes Monetago's global strategies. Welcome to the talk show, Neil. Hi, glad to connect with you today. Neil, you're in mute.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah. Can I start there?
Yep, of course.
Yeah. In the last 10 years, there has been lots of advancement happening in global trade and finance. Technology is added in all aspects of trade finance to make the process more efficient. On the other hand, there are lots of risks are also emerging. So please give us overall outlook how global trade and finance has been moving technology based in the last 10 years, and what is Monetago's role in it?
Okay. Firstly, the technology advancements piece, I think is probably more important if we dig down onto certain value propositions or pain points. So there's obviously, fraud prevention's one, digital documents like e-bill of lading, e-invoicing is another, and then the many different journeys that people have taken with different tech stacks. Of course, 10 years ago, 8 years ago, there was a lot of hype around blockchain for many years after that, about the workflow efficiencies and privacy enhancing efficiencies and gains that blockchain or DLT would add to trade and finance globally. None of that really eventualized because, one of the big beliefs that we have here at Monetago is that unless it's 10 times cheaper and 10 times faster, 10 times more efficient, is it actually going to scale? And also because, trade has to be not only, say, in India, but cross-border and global in nature, so too does the tech stack. And the interoperability piece is obviously very key there too. And that's, again, across all of the different sort of value propositions that we spoke about in terms of digitalization of trade or solving various pain points. When Monetago started, we used to use DLT. Sadly, for our particular value proposition, and this is back to India, once we got to a certain amount of throughput, a certain amount of scale, there was latency concerns, and so we sort of moved away from that to a more global architecture, more scalability, cheaper cost, because again, we at Monetago believe that unless it's sort of nearly free, people won't be using it in particularly emerging markets, and if you don't include the emerging markets, then the developed markets aren't going to move really either. So we've kind of taken this approach to build cheaper, more scalable, faster, interoperable, cross-border and domestic sort of infrastructure, so that it's not siloed, and so that there's a greater sort of adoption of different technologies. And of course, sort of in the India space, we speak about the liquidity, SME, MSME financing. When we have a look at the factoring companies and the trades exchanges and the other people that we started working with initially, they need to benefit from it too. So these sort of technology infrastructures can't be very expensive, and so we sort of have moved away from various blockchain technologies and other tech stacks that are more expensive, so that it's not prohibitive from an economic standpoint, and so that everybody can sort of use it. Obviously, the Trades Exchanges is a great example of sort of exponential growth in MSME liquidity, and our solution being above and between that. And as that scaled exponentially, so too did the need of our infrastructure. And we're very pleased to say that, you know, in India, where we kind of got our foothold, our company's learned a lot of lessons about the tech stack, and grown with India and globally because of our learnings in India.
Great. Thanks for the detailed explanation. So here, the blockchain and the new way of technology-based e-invoicing or helped to move technology to the different level. And in the meantime, we are seeing trade finance frauds witnessed today are much more sophisticated than the traditional scams a decade ago. So these kind of fraud prevention softwares and technology need to be used by many lenders to make more foolproof system in their trade finance equipment. So moving on to the next discussion point, that is over 10 billion in trade finance losses have been publicly identified since 2020 alone, accounting for just a small fraction of the total cost of fraud. Please explain us what are the common trade finance frauds happening globally and how Monetago can prevent these frauds.
So our start under the auspices of RBI was when there was documented duplicate financing requests above and between different clients of ours in India. That's become a very endemic problem in financing globally. And that's not just the duplicate pledging of the same document to multiple financiers, the re-aging of old documents, as well as a particularly prominent fraud typology, and also sort of fraudulent, fictitious or altered trade finance documents. And financing not just of invoices between different lenders, but different documents with the same underlying collateral between different lenders also. So again, from our sort of growth or beginning in the genesis of our solution from being an India-centric invoice-only registry at the beginning to a cross-document, cross-border solution, we've seen the maturing of fraudsters becoming more savvy. Of course, they will always try and commit fraud. And then the other sort of common fraud typology is the over-under invoicing, which is something else that we're starting to tackle. I would sort of over-declare for the purposes of laundering money or under-declare to pay less tax, for example. And our system is addressing, detecting and deterring all of these fraud typologies. This is something that's not just a problem in India, it's a problem everywhere. Developed countries, emerging markets, for commodity funds, factoring companies, banks, any lender that sees any document, these sort of fraud typologies are a problem everywhere. And so, that's another reason why we've sort of grown, matured our solution to not just be one document, not just one country, but a interconnected, interoperable series of risk mitigation solutions that can talk to one another.
Okay, great. So it's not just one document, it's a series of risk mitigation you provide. And also, I would like to add, there are for each high-profile fraud case, it's not just the company that losses out. So the shock waves are felt across the industry, impacting many banks and the third parties that are involved in trade finance transaction. So any large value fraud in a financial institution will totally change the business flow and future outlook. So it is very important, nowadays to maintain this fraud prevention very closely for the sustainable finance arrangement for any lenders. So that it is very clear. So moving on to the next point, Monetago is already in India providing a fraud prevention solution. How do you see RBI and India government support to share access to relevant government electronic sites like e-way bill, GST, etc.?
So in India, we sort of do our fraud analytics or checks on document data sets, and then we can check the authenticity or provenance of the data contained in a document prior to financing against golden sources of information. So in India, We use the GST verification, for example, to check the authenticity of documents. Globally, we can do that against sort of maritime data aggregators like Lloyd's List, for example. And this is very important, not to just check the document isn't financed or has a lien on it from another lender, but also that the data contained in that document is very authentic. And that's why, coupled with sort of the privacy enhancing technology that we use, I won't go too deep into that one, but generally it safeguards data and ensures confidence to sort of increase liquidity. So going back to the point you made earlier, over a period of time, we've seen exponential growth of our solution, and that sort of really helps increase or unlock the liquidity to that SME and MSME segment. And they are people that don't get the financing. And recently at the WTO, I heard that 50% of all SMEs seeking finance don't get funding. And it's a terrifying statistic.
Yeah.
So, checking the validity of the document and the data contained in the document to give the financier increased confidence to lend is very, very important. And that RBI and authoritative body partnership or public-private partnership with companies like ours and central banks alike is very important, so that we can access their golden truths of data. And that's what we're doing in multiple jurisdictions.
Okay, great. Good to know that government is extending necessary support from relevant government bodies, and Indian government also taking lots of initiative to promote factoring and receivable finance platforms. The last 5 years, we have seen the platform business in receivables in India. It's growing exponential growth, and to support growing companies to raise working capital finance faster under unsecured manner. So moving on to the next discussion point, how factoring and trade finance community is one of the major benefiter from this fraud prevention mechanism. Please explain us in detail how invoice registration system are reshaping and landscaping and improving fraud prevention.
So registries, collateral registries, receivables recording centers, invoice registries, trade finance registries are all various names for the same thing. What's very important here is that they are interoperable across markets, across borders, and across tech stacks. So, for example, we're working with cloud providers, factoring technology providers, back office systems integrators at banks themselves, SWIFT, and many other people that are all sort of interconnected to various lenders. The reason this is very important is so that these checks and balances can be made above and between all different types of financiers, from the banks to the commodity funds, to the factors, to the non-bank lenders in general. And because of the cross-border nature of international trade, this huge scale is somewhat very, very important. Whilst frauds obviously can happen domestically, the largest frauds have often included cross-border trade finance with lenders in multiple jurisdictions. That interoperability thing is very key. And again, as I go back to earlier, interoperable solution in multi-document analytics is the only way to truly control that problem. Now, if there is a factoring company and they have a loss, it could well shut down that business. Obviously, banks have bigger books. By comparison, a loss at a factoring company to a loss at a bank would be a rounding error. But the factoring companies are the ones that are more focused on the SME segment, and that's where that economic growth story really comes from. And that's why it's very important that we work with the SME and MSME finances the most, because of that economic growth narrative. The SMEs and MSMEs, we talk about the trade finance gap. Of course, disproportionately, there's more women-led businesses in the SME or MSME segment. So de-risking that portion of the market particularly is very important to increase liquidity. Those people right now pay more for borrowing because they're seen as the riskier part. So we and other providers of risk mitigation technology are very important to sort of increase confidence to that market segment particularly. And then you get the economic growth narrative, and that sort of registry narrative being the only effective tool to de-risk the SME segment and the SME or MSME financing has really taken off. That narrative now is truly global. We're literally having conversations in many dozens of countries about this interoperable fraud prevention technology, and that's very important too.
Yeah, that's true. So this invoice registry, this helped the factoring business to grow because that is supporting SME and MSME finance, as you rightly said, that is the backbone of a country. So based on this registry, now the industry able to get a good financing arrangement. And also I have a doubt. So this registry, each country having a specific registry. So how in cross-border finance, this is getting connected? This is not a global registry. They have no country-wise specific registry. And there is a limitation to verify. And can you please throw some light on this matter?
Okay, so we're very humbled and honored by the fact that we started out in India. And as I said earlier, sort of a invoice-only India solution at first. Monetigo was very, again, humbled and honored to be the first ever fintech partner of SWIFT. And what does that mean? We set about designing, architecting, and deploying a global standard of interoperable registries that could be deployed in multiple jurisdictions, that was standards-based. So, you know, UNC-FACT reference data structures, ISO 20022 future-proof data structures. And that partnership with SWIFT created a foundation for interoperability or mutual usability. And that was the first time this had ever happened. And so these sort of registries can be interoperable across borders. And it's very important because, you know, working in several jurisdictions, and let's take India, for example. Let's pick Standard Chartered, for example. Bangladesh is a big partner for you. It's on your doorstep. If there's a registry in Bangladesh and a registry in India, but they don't communicate, that's obviously a problem. There's international trade finance banks and you know, picking Standard Chartered because they're big in Bangladesh, for example, they wouldn't want to use a different registry in Bangladesh and a different registry in India. And so too, the harmonization of data structures, tech stack, and interoperability in general of sort of fraud prevention or risk mitigation solution, and this isn't just Monetigo, this is anybody, is very, very important. We're sort of working in multiple jurisdictions with a wide array of different partners, from regulatory bodies to banking commissions, multilateral development banks, and everybody understands that both intra and extra regional interoperability of risk mitigation technology to de-risk supply chains is very, very important to, again, enable more liquidity to the people that need it the most. You know, to reduce the economic risk cost and the cost associated with fraud, again, sort of hoping to tackle, and again, I truly believe that Monetigo is one of the few companies in the world that's actually at scale addressed the trade finance gap by increasing liquidity. The supply chain finance piece that I mentioned earlier is very important about the harmonization or interoperability of fraud prevention, because supply chain financing of a purchase order can happen from any country. Even invoice financing can happen, you know, in many different situations where a buyer or supplier gets funding from different countries. One of the, you know, talk about a big fraud, Phoenix Commodities. They were based in Dubai. They were taking financing from lenders and banks and non-banks across Africa, Asia, Europe, Middle East, all receiving lending from invoices and bills of lading, and a lack of interoperability or sharing of data between these different institutions and countries is very much why that fraud was perpetrated in such a large scale. So unless there is sort of harmonization, interoperability, you know, there's no way that these domestic issues can get solved. It has to be a collective ecosystem approach.
Right, great. So as the registry get connect, definitely the business scope will increase in a different level. And we are seeing in India, the finance and factoring market is growing very rapidly. And especially the factoring, as you mentioned, India is valued at 5 billion factoring market in 2020 and projected to reach 50 billion in 2032. Definitely, you know, these kind of growing markets, we need to have a clear fraud prevention system, and also the registry, connecting the registry to the neighboring countries and for the cross-border transaction will definitely not take the business to the different level. So
Yeah.
so we'll move on to the next discussion point. This is about the dual financing. Dual financing is one of the big fraud, and many financial institutions get affected to this. This is a very long-term issue for all the financial institutions. So how dual financing can happen in domestically and cross-border financing too. So there are dual financing in domestic. To prevent dual financing in domestic, there may be different fraud prevention technique you may use. And how about international? Because this is totally different connection you need to make. Can you please give us broad view how this dual financing in domestic and international you are providing fraud prevention techniques?
So we took obviously the trillions of export gold that India has is an amazing target, and even if they get close to that, what an amazing achievement that will be. But without a safe, risk-free or reduced risk environment, that's going to be very difficult. Now, there are buyers and suppliers inside and outside of India that can get financing inside and outside of India on the same underlying collateral. And that's a very common fraud typology. As I mentioned, sort of that Phoenix Commodities one is a very public case, so I can talk about that. There were the example where people were recycling the same documents in multiple regions, different continents, different lenders, bank and non-bank, and it still happens all the time. Monetigo, I'm very proud to say, we catch a large amount of fraud every single month. I won't name names or talk in statistics, but it's incredible how powerful our solution is. And even if we just talk about the TREDS exchanges and the increased confidence that there's been to lend through that mechanism, the amount of increased year-on-year liquidity that the TREDS exchanges see, the amount of new lenders, the amount of new suppliers seeking financing, registering with the TREDS exchanges, all because it's a risk-free environment, is been really encouraging. And of course, we want to do that for domestically for India, for their export business, and sort of throughout the region and globally, and that's what we're aiming to do. But this sort of cross-document, cross-border fraud typology is what we sort of stop, or frauds that we stop. And when we built our global version with SWIFT and dozens of banks that have helped, we've basically created this standard, and we've heard back from many people that they wanted this. So that's why we took the solution global.
Okay, thanks for the detailed explanation, Neil. And there is an audience question we'll take for this. This is from Paramanandan. And what are the authentications Monetago undertake to identify double finance in cross-border trade?
Okay, so we're verifying documents between lenders in single countries and globally. We, for example, have registries in multiple jurisdictions. So if there's a transaction between a certain trade route, we can check if that document's been financed by a bank in country A or country B prior to disbursement of funding, between banks or outside of banks and non-banks. And that comes back to that global registry. There's a global registry for global cross-border transactions, and the interoperability between different jurisdiction registries as well.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. And you have Monetago recently registered with the FCA, and this FCA is one of the global governing body for all the factoring companies. And now we are all the factoring companies are registered. We are also one of the FCA member. And so once they onboard Monetago, so then the factoring company can book invoices in one API, or how it operates. Can you share us?
Maybe this is a different question, or different. I can give a different answer. FCI is a global best practice standards body or standard setter for factoring, and they understand that the types of fraud that are most common in this space are those that we tackle, and so they advocate for the use of our solution. We are the only global provider of registries in the world, and the reason that they advocate for us is they've seen, as have we, that these registries are very, very effective tools, or the analytics that we do above and between lenders is a very, very effective tool to de-risk, detect, and deter such frauds. And that's why we partnered with FCI, just like we partnered with SWIFT as well.
Okay, great. Okay. Yeah. So That's good to know. And there is the next. We are moving on for the next question. So this is, you are already in expansion mode. As you said, in India you started, and we are glad that India Factoring was one of the very earlier customer for Monetago. And now, how is your expansion plan, and what are the recent tie-ups and associations you are making, and give us your future plan about Monetago.
So, future plans. That's a long question. Okay, so we again honored to have started in India, as you say. India Factoring was one of our very first clients, and Ravi I consider a friend because he's been a great mentor to me as well. But taking that growth that we've taken from India, the growth from working with single and a few different clients to a global solution after partnering with Swift India and then Swift globally. We're working with the International Chamber of Commerce. We're working with the global underwriting body. All the underneath them is the Allianzes and the Eulers. They understand that if you de-risk trade, they're more inclined to underwrite more trade financing, which further catalyzes more risk-free and with more underwriting that catalyzes even more liquidity. There are multilateral banks all over the world talking about registries being the only effective tool. They, of course, understand that across supply chain, these registries or risk mitigation technologies like ours need to be interoperable. There are FCI is another example of how they understand that registries are an effective tool to prevent fraud. We've got central banks, banking commissions, and many others to all working with us. And again, we're the only provider of this service globally, and look forward to sort of continuing our work in the India market.
Okay, that's great. So you are keep expanding and moving to the various big territory. That is good. So the more you move on, like FCA and Shift and other trade bodies, it is good for the cross-border transaction. Company like us, like factoring companies and banks, it's always more helpful to do finance more confidently. Even if you take India Factoring, we are a pure and secure lender. We finance based on the transaction, and these kind of fraud prevention technology give us more confidence to give more finance to the MSMEs or SMEs, because any small fraud, as you said, the banks in the size they may withstand, and at the factoring and NBFC companies, it is more important not to lose any money in the fraud.
Indeed.
Definitely, the more you register, it's always good. And we have an audience question again, and this is from Hirva Mamtora. How long does it take to process the authentication of documents and revert to financier?
That depends a little bit on the amount of documents we do. We can process many thousands of documents in a second, but the verification of the fraud check and the authentication against different sources is still a very, very short time, under a second. So it's a very quick preference is pre-disbursement of finances is how the system usually works.
Okay, great. Thanks, Hirva. So even I like to share our experience as well, because we are one of the Monetago user. So once the borrower onboard Monetago in the system, and it go very seamlessly without any hurdle. So we are processing thousands of documents every day in and out. And at the moment they log in the new document things, it's all on the back end. It happens automatically. There is no manual intervention. It goes to the GST site and eBay bill within fraction of second. Everything get verified, and it's a smooth flow. We never faced any challenge in it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Neil. Thanks for joining in, and thank you for taking your time in your schedule.
My pleasure. Sure. Thank you for having me. Please send my best to Ravi, and I'll speak with you when I'm next there. I'll come and see you again. Thanks, guys.
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you. And thank you all. Hope all questions were answered. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you want to know more about factoring or India Factoring, please visit our LinkedIn page or YouTube channel, or directly reach out to us on our direct contact numbers available in our website. I'm signing off. We'll be back shortly with another chat show with an interesting topic. Thanks.